Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Chelsea Collier. I'm the founder of Digi.City and the editor-at-large for Smart Cities Connect. We're here to talk about smart cities and policy, and I thought, given the issue of Proptech, it would be in the best interest of everyone to bring on who I consider one of the most subject matter experts in this space, Tom Shircliff with Intelligent Buildings. So I'll get started on my kind of views around smart cities, the implications of policy, and how we can create more connected cities. But first, Tom, I want to give you the opportunity to just say hello and introduce yourself.
Well, thanks. I appreciate being here. I'm Tom Shircliff. I'm co-founder and principal of Intelligent Buildings, and we're a smart building management consulting and managed services company.
Thanks so much. So I'm going to share a few slides with you. Promise this will not be a boring PowerPoint presentation, but just an opportunity to give some visuals for some of the concepts that we're talking about. So there we are, what we're talking about today, the role of policy in shaping connected cities. And so what is Digi.City? Again, I founded Digi.City as a way to really talk about the intersection of different organizations and issues. And a lot of times the smart cities conversation gets mired down in the technical piece of this, but anybody who's been in that smart city world knows that people are at the center. And so Digi.City focuses on the thoughtful application of technology to address specifically civic and social challenges. Again, a very human-centered approach. And below is some of the ways that we do that. So feel free to browse around. Everything is free. It's just resources to help us move forward in the conversation. So if you ask 10,000 people what the definition of a smart city is, you will get 10,000 different answers. This is my definition at its most simplest term, and I think applicable for this audience. It's the Internet of Things for the urban environment. So obviously you look at this pyramid, and at the infrastructure level, it's all around connectivity and power. Moving up, it's the Internet of Things, all of these connected devices that are accessing data, and then how you share that data, how you selectively use that data to make smarter decisions is in service of the people in that community. And so the benefits on the side are, number one, if applied thoughtfully, a city can save resources. There's obviously an increase in equity because different stakeholders are brought to the table, and it's an opportunity to promote prosperity. Promoting prosperity is a piece that often gets left out. The business community is often seen as a vendor instead of a partner. And that's one of the ways that I think that policy and smart policy can really change how smart technology is thoughtfully applied in cities. So the more modern cities who are really looking at a digital evolution as an opportunity, they're thinking of their cities as platforms. And I know this is a very busy graphic and it's very challenging to read. That's on purpose. It's supposed to be overwhelming. The purpose of this slide is to communicate the complexity. So when we're talking about us as individuals and residents, it's easier for us to think, well, I can have anything through my smartphone and the world responds to me as a user, but that's not exactly how government is set up. And the promise of the smart city is that some of that is starting to change. So the most important part of that starting to change is about thinking differently about who is framing the conversation. This piece right now, the smart city ecosystem, is an hour-long presentation in and of itself. So I won't belabor the point, but the high-level takeaway from this slide is that you need all 7 of these, and there's 6 around the center, 6 around the edge, and then residents at the center. You need representatives from each of these areas in order to truly move forward as a smart city. And that's the part where policy comes into play, because most policies are set up for the 3rd industrial revolution, not the 4th, which is where we currently are. So the most challenging thing, I think, for government and really for all of us, obviously we're in a time of great upheaval, is this concept of change. Change is the new normal, and we are going to have to do our personal work and work as a community to be able to get more comfortable with change and to embrace the constant state of evolution that we find ourselves in. Policy obviously has a role to play in that. So this is a graphic that I stole from GovTech. They are a wonderful resource for everything at the intersection of government and technology, hence the name. And they do a great job of really doing the research and writing articles and hosting webinars about the new normal of state and local government. So you can see all of these different sections, whether it's how do governments or city councils kind of broadcast their city council meetings remotely instantly. And the private sector, a lot of us are used to working from home, and the government sector, that's not quite so common. So all of these movements, we're all embracing them overnight, obviously because of COVID, but the back end of that is much more challenging. So when it comes to the policies that enable some of these things, you know, initially everyone was knee-jerking into immediate action, and now we're having to rethink and reframe policies in order to support this new level of activity that's needed. And the things that can help us get there in this era of disruption and obviously adaptation is the ability for everyone, not just government, but all of those different sectors in the ecosystem to be flexible, to be accountable to each other, and to be ultimately transparent. And again, that's not the way that policy usually works. So just in summary, the real takeaway from a smart city and connected buildings, connected communities is all about the ethical collection of data. And it's really important to make sure that you're not just collecting data ad hoc, but that there are some very thoughtful, strategic ways that you can create the systems to be able to invite all of those different players across the ecosystem to gather that data, understand the data, protect the data, all within an ethical framework. And Tom's going to share a little bit about how you actually go and do that. I've had the great pleasure of working with Tom on a couple of different fronts and projects, and I've seen him and his team's action at work, and they're just the best in the business. So Tom, I'll let you take it from here.
Well, thanks, Chelsea. And when you talk about a smart city, I mean, invariably that involves lots of the built environment, a lot of the buildings. Just look out your window and you see all these buildings. And so when we think about even traffic or public safety or events or utility interaction, a lot of the things we think about, they have to do with the buildings. And so we're encouraging and been fortunate to be involved in billions of dollars of development of getting buildings to go from what you see on the left there, which is a silo environment where every building system where there's so much data has its own little network and connection, to doing what's on the right over here, where the building itself has a data backbone and access to all the systems data in it. And a couple of things just before we get to the city perspective is, if you're the person building or occupying or managing that building, the infrastructure on the right, or the approach on the right, is a better cost structure. Obviously, it fosters interoperability, access to data, and very importantly, cyber security. And then I think you'll see on the next slide that if we've done those things for the building's best interest, we now can see that building is ready to communicate and talk to things like traffic, even parcel delivery. You can see public safety, events, even severe weather. And then moving on to the next image there, we've gone from the building doing what's best for it. Now, if you flip it around and see the city view from the bottom to the top, you can say, wait a minute, if building owners and managers start doing this for their best interest, that's also the exact same thing that the city wants to do to be able to push data and pull data from those buildings. So it's really the proverbial win-win from a data perspective and a smart city ultimate destination.
That makes a ton of sense. And I'm going to go ahead and close this slide and then go to us talking. Hopefully I did that right. Does this look okay? I think I did it right. Forgiveness for technical glitches if there are some. But I think you bring up a really important point just in terms of ultimately the built environment, the different companies, whether they're global corporates or they're startups who are innovating in that built environment. and the city, the government, ultimately all want the same thing. And what I've seen is a lot of times they just have some trouble kind of getting in the same room and speaking the same language. So I know you've worked all over the world in terms of implementing some of these systems. What have you seen in terms of what makes cities more successful than not in that regard?
Yeah, I think what it is making that connection between the city and the government and the private real estate developer or owner. And obviously, a lot of people want to do the right thing, but you have an obligation to your lenders, to your partners, to your occupants and tenants and the organization that the building itself has to serve a purpose and reach that purpose. And then sometimes it feels like that might be separate from the city's interest. But what we've just talked about a second ago is that the way you should build a building for the real estate's self-interest is fortunately and coincidentally exactly what it needs to do to really integrate almost seamlessly with a smart city or a smart community. So I think the breakthrough was that the private building owners are not doing it just to be good corporate citizens. They're doing it for their self-interest that also allows them to connect to the city in a much more productive and secure way, both physical security and cyber security.
And it's so interesting over the past couple of years, we've seen the private sector integrate more closely with the built environment in cities, whether we're talking about rideshare companies or scooters. And of course, COVID has turned the entire world upside down in just a matter of months. So all of that looks a little bit differently now. But I think it could be a chance to reset, kind of press pause and see what are the optimal relationships between public and private sector? How do we invite developers and all of the innovation that comes from that sector into integrating more closely with the government and not just framing government as, oh, that slow bureaucratic system that we have to deal with and eye roll, but how do we work together as teams and how do we create mutual benefit? And I think data holds the answer to unlock some of that.
Well, you're right. And just you mentioned the pandemic, and that really makes this point even more strongly because the government wants information to do its job on the public health front, but also in a building, what we found is that converged configuration allows you to very quickly, and we've done this for customers, create pandemic use cases in buildings between existing systems. So just a quick example, if your access card that gets you in the building can also tell your elevator what floor you're going to, I just created a touchless experience and I didn't buy a new system. And then the city can potentially get certain kind of sensor data from where the people. So there's really the smart building principles have really been proven out even more in this pandemic of how we can just point them at a different cause.
Great point. And I know the question that I get a lot is how do we find the balance between information that we are willing to give up in order to create either more convenience or more safety, and how are cities able to kind of keep that information not only secure, but deal with some of the ethical issues around privacy. So I know you and your team do a lot of work around that, specifically balancing privacy and security. So I wonder if you have any case studies there or just quick examples you can give.
Yeah, the irony is the more technology, the easier it is to use metadata rather than individual or personalized data. So we can tell in an area of a building when the density of people, whether it's from CO2 sensors or occupancy sensors and other ways that can then communicate through digital signage and other, how people can move around and do that without even getting to the personal information level. So we found very effective use cases where we're accomplishing the goal of safety or public health without getting to that level.
Yeah, And I think, too, it's important to note that it doesn't have to be an all or nothing scenario, that there are places in the middle, and it's ultimately up to every community to state what the comfort level is and what some of the trade-offs are. And it's an opportunity to invite a new conversation in the community. We're seeing an uptick of civic participation levels that are unprecedented for many, many different reasons. And so how do you take that momentum of people really diving in? And, in the past, it was really tough to get people to city council meetings. I mean, the fact that you have to be there in person during a certain point of the day when working individuals and working parents and, life happens is one factor. But now that they're online, it's an opportunity to really jump in and influence what's happening on your local level with your municipality.
I think that's right. And also you touched on something that it's important to note is that different stakeholder groups have different approaches to privacy and data. So the general public is not the same as somebody that works for a company and their HR policy, and the contractors that service that company or service the building are not the same as the employees. So I think we can just open up a little bit and say the different stakeholder groups may have different approaches to the data and the privacy issue, and that's okay.
Yeah, that's a really great point. One size does not fit all. So we're coming up to the end of our time together. I'm going to see if there are questions. Please forgive me as I kind of come around here. I'm not entirely sure if there are questions here. So if anyone does have a question, you can go ahead and just put it in the chat, and we'll try to address those best as we can. Maybe one kind of closing idea or question is, Tom, if you had a magic wand and you could just decide the future of cities in the U.S., what would that look like relative to smart cities in the built environment?
Yeah, I really think it would be something like the slide that you showed to get building owners to create those kind of buildings, because they are so much of the physical landscape and so much of the time that the citizens are in. That if I can do things like if first responders can know exactly the corner of the building where there's a problem and there's a hurt person and know what the doors are going to be unlocked, those are the kind of things where that public safety and first responder, even active shooters, severe weather. I mean, I know it sounds like a real estate centric idea, but if you just look out your window again and you could think that all the city services, including traffic anticipation and those kind of things, could be connected to the buildings that we're in. I think that would facilitate many, many use cases without having to look at it as all new CapEx spend or taxpayer money.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe as a takeaway, the action item that we should all think about, and you all in the Proptech world, is imagining what could be possible and then framing that and addressing that on the local level with your city government.
Yep, and realizing that it is in the core real estate self-interest to do it, and it happens to be what the smart city is looking for, to really literally connect the entire city for almost all basic city services.
Mm-hmm. And in the best interest of residents, right? With more information, we can make better decisions.
Right.
So, great. Well, thank you so much to Igloo Home for this opportunity. Tom, I appreciate you sharing your insight and your time. I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this. If there are questions afterwards, certainly can reach me, Chelsea at Digi.City, CHELSEA at DIGI.CITY, or Tom at Intelligent Buildings. And we hope to have your ideas, some of your questions, maybe even some challenges too. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks. Happy to be part of it.